Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to, by my count, meeting number 8 of the Arizona Lower Base Drought Contingency Plan Steering Committee. Welcome to CWCD headquarters once again. Bathrooms are down here. I think we have water out there, maybe even some snacks, I'm not sure. Help yourself. We've got a pretty full agenda today. I think there are copies of the presentation and the agenda out on the table. Here's what we'll cover today. In a moment, we'll go around the head table up here for the delegates or alternates to introduce themselves. That will be followed by an update from, will that be from you, Leslie, or your staff? From you personally? Okay. She is her staff today. On the Colorado River, the latest Colorado River projections, including some sensitivity analysis. We then will give a status of the implementation plan. The last time this group convened was on November 29th. It's a month and a half ago, and there have been, I know, 2 CWCD board meetings since then, lots of other meetings and conversations, so there's some things to catch up on. We'll have an update on the intrastate DCP ICS process and where it stands right now. There's some outstanding issues that we need to discuss. We will have a review again of mitigation and offset component agreements. We promised the last time that we needed to identify and draft a number of implementing agreements to make both the offset plan and the mitigation plan happen. So we'll go through that list today, and also other actions that need to occur and potential legislation that is being considered over and above the joint resolution that is necessary in the legislature to participate in the interstate plan. We'll cover the timeline and next steps. We'll take a break somewhere. If we can get through all of that, we'll take a break at the end of that. But we definitely will take a break between next steps and delegate comments and public comment at the end, so that everyone can kind of collect their thoughts and before we do that. So let's dive in to welcome and introductions. We'll go around the table, and then we'll follow that with a hydrology update. Let's start down at the end with Jamie. Sorry.
Cynthia Campbell from the City of Phoenix.
Brian Wong, representing Pima County Agriculture.
Sandy Favorites, Freeport.
Tim Tomier, Director of Tucson Water.
Kevin Moran, EDF and Water for Arizona Coalition, alternate for Ted Kowalski of Walton Family Foundation.
Virginia O'Connell, Arizona Water Bank.
Brian Biesmeyer, Scottsdale Water.
Spencer Cams, Home Builders Association of Central.
Jolson, Metro Water District.
Stephanie Smallhouse, Arizona Farm Bureau.
Paul Orm, Pinell County Agriculture.
Senator Lisa Tondo, Legislative District 4, alternate Senator Andrea D'Alessandro.
Good afternoon. Representative Rosanna Gabaldon, Legislative District 2, and my alternate is Representative Kirsten Engel.
Lisa Atkins, Central Arizona Project Board.
Mark Taylor, Central Arizona Project Board, and alternate for Board Member Karen Caesar.
Leslie Myers, Bureau of Reclamation.
Tom Bushowski, Director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. My alternate is Clint Chandler.
Ted Cook, Central Arizona Project. My alternate is Suzanne Tickner.
Hunter Moore, Governor's Office.
Sina Kerr, State Senator from LD 13. I'm filling in for Senator Griffin.
Rusty Bowers, District 25 in the House of Representatives.
Stephen Earl Lewis, Governor of the Gila River Indian Community.
Dennis Patch, Chairman, Colorado River Indian Tribes.
Joshua Reese, Acting Attorney General for the Tohono Nation, filling in for Chairman Edward Manuel.
Brad Strader, Roosevelt Water, representing Maricopa Agriculture. I'm standing in for Shane Leonard.
Laura Grignano, Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District.
David Godleski, Southern Arizona Home Builders Association.
Bill Garfield, Arizona Water Company. My alternate's Fred Schneider.
Dave Roberts on behalf of Salt River Project.
Doug Dunham, Epcor Water, sitting in for Joe Geisel.
Javier Sedovich, City of Goodyear.
Ted Maxwell with the Southern Arizona Leadership. My alternate, Kip Volpe, is also here today.
Wade Noble, Yuma.
Glenn Hammer, Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Cheryl Lombard, Valley Partnership, representing the development industry.
Okay, thank you. So Leslie, if you want to, I'll even hand you the mouse if you want to flip your own slides.
Thanks, Ted. Oops. All right, I already. Well, if you just. Okay, and I am going to do the slides a little bit out of order, and I apologize for that. Okay, so it's good to see everyone. Welcome back. Happy New Year. I wish I had better news today, but I'm going to start off by doing a little bit of background on the current conditions on the river, and then we've run a few scenarios to give some folks some ideas about projections for 2019 specifically. So the current elevation in Lake Powell is 3582. It's at 42% capacity. Lake Mead is at elevation 1081, which is 31% of capacity. The Lake Powell April through July unregulated inflow forecast in December was forecasted 4.69 million acre-feet of inflow for April through July. That was 66% of the 30-year average. For January, the unregulated inflow forecast is 4.55 million acre-feet, which is 64%, so a slight reduction there between December and January. The projected release from Lake Powell to Lake Mead for 2019 is 8.66 million acre-feet. We're on this sliding track now between 9 million and 8.23, so that will likely change throughout the year, and we'll verify that later in April. So we have a couple of scenarios that we'll get to in a minute that look at what the end-of-year projections for 2019 may be. So we have the December 24-month study, which assumes, we use the data from that study, assumes a 66% inflow of average. We have a wetter than forecast, which would be nice. Assumes a 79% of average, which is 13% greater than the December forecast. And if we had that amount, and the reason we use that is we would get a 9 million acre-foot release in 2019, and likely an 8.23 or greater in 2020. So that helps us see best case, what we might look at. Well, I guess not best case, but a good case, what things might look like at the end of 2019. We have a drier than projected forecast, which assumes that Lake Powell inflow is less than the 65% of average, and results in an 8.23 million acre-foot release in 2019 and a 7.48 in 2020. Then we have drier than the forecast plus no DCP. And we've had a lot of discussion about this over time and what that means. The implication is that the California and Nevada would not want to strand their intentionally created surplus, and they would take delivery in 2019 and what that might look like. So Ted, if we can go to the fourth slide then, that has the assumptions. There we go. I thought it might be easier to just talk through these before we actually get to the numbers. So the assumptions here are that for the 24-month study, it assumes the most probable inflow into Lake Powell, the 66% of average, Lake Powell release of 8.66 million acre-feet and 7.48 in 2020. Lower basin inflows are the 5-year average. The wetter than forecast, the positive scenario, assumes that we have a 79% of average, and that the Lake Powell release is 9 million acre-feet. The drier forecast, again, is that we have just 1% less, 65% of average, 8.23 million acre-foot release from Powell to Meade in 2019, a 7.48 in 2020. So the most important piece here, I think, is what happens with the no DCP. It assumes the drier than forecast hydrology, but it also assumes the delivery of 525,000 acre-feet of ICS out of Lake Meade, 400,000 to California, and 125 to Nevada during 2019. So then we can go back to the table slide. And what this shows us is, and I think you've seen some of these tables in some of our last presentations, is if we use the December 24-month study, which is the most likely scenario, we project that we would end the year at 1,068.1. If we use the wetter forecast, we would end the year at 1077, which is just slightly above a tier 1 shortage. The drier forecast with DCP, we would end the year at 1062.5. The drier forecast with no DCP, that's with all the delivery of the 525,000 acre-feet, we would end the year at 1055. So just to remind everyone, a tier 1 shortage is between 1077 and 1050. So except for the wetter forecast, all of those would end the year in a tier 1 shortage. Very close, though, to a tier 2, potentially with the drier forecast and no DCP, which tier 2 is between, and we've subdivided now tier 2A and tier 2B, but tier 2A is 1050 to 1045, and tier 2B is below 1045. So that shows you, that table gives you some good information at likely what the outcomes could be with and without DCP this year. And then the last slide that we have really is just a graphic that shows you then those conditions and where we are in the shortage. This doesn't delineate tier 1 and tier 2. A and tier 2B. But you can see the drastic difference between the wetter forecast. It's 20 feet, essentially, more than 20 feet, and then the drier with no DCP. So, like I said at the beginning, I wish I had better news, but I think we hold a lot of the fate in our hands, and so I encourage everyone to keep this in mind as we're talking today.
So, thanks, Leslie. Back to the table, Ted, for a second. So I want to make sure, Leslie, that the first 3, December 24-month, wetter than and drier than, those assume we have DCP in place?
They do.
And that Nevada and California's water stays in the lake, correct?
That is correct.
Otherwise, those numbers would be significantly lower.
Right. So the only difference between the drier than forecast and the drier than DCP is the delivery of ICS. So even the wetter would be much lower too. All of the assumptions are with DCP in place until we get to the fourth scenario.
Based on this year's water orders, right now, is Nevada or California's water orders set up in a way that they're taking their ICS out of the lake?
So their water orders do incorporate the delivery of their ICS today. And I think if you all follow Twitter, you've seen some tweets specifically from Metropolitan Water District that confirms that they have ordered their water. They are capable of modifying their order and leaving their water in Lake Meade as long as DCP is passed soon.
And do you have a feeling for how long they can wait until they change that order to ensure that all of the ICS stays in the lake? Any ballpark time?
So that I don't know for sure. I think it's sometime in the spring. I think they would need to modify their orders in the next few months, but likely there's things they could do probably through the early summer. But certainly the sooner they modify their order, the more surety we have.
So because this is really important, there's lots of numbers. Any of the delegates have questions for Leslie? Speaker Bowers.
Thank you, Leslie. So I understand that they currently are removing some of their ICS, both California and Nevada?
They both have their ICS deliveries scheduled for this year. So if nothing changes in their schedules, they would take delivery of their ICS this year. They are capable of front-loading some of their deliveries and modifying later so that they could net leave their ICS in the lake. And that is conditioned on the approval and of the drought contingency plan.
Is that also, Mr. Chairman, is that also contingent on their own approval? I mean, have they all approved and are working ahead?
So Met and Southern Nevada Water Authority, yes, they have both approved.
But when you say, so there's two authorities in Nevada and I don't know how many in California.
Both authorities in Nevada, Colorado Commission and Southern Nevada are approved.
Do I understand, Mr. Chairman, that the California order has also been put in for water?
Right, that's the metropolitan order that Leslie talked about.
And
it's their ICS.
So what I'm understanding is that both Nevada authorities have, that was the two. Are you saying that Metropolitan Water of Southern California has also?
Right. So Nevada inclusive is approved.
Okay.
There's no more entities that have not approved the DCP in Nevada. The entity that has ICS, which can take their ICS, which is Metropolitan Water District, has approved the DCP.
Okay. Thank you.
So wanted to do a quick recap of the November 29th steering committee meeting. And we had many of the delegates expressing support for the DCP implementation plan that we presented that day, including representatives of the M&I users from the three counties, Gila River Indian Community, NGOs, on-river users, and DWR. There were some questions raised, though. Some delegates expressed concern regarding the lack of certainty for Pinal agricultural users, the removal of CAGRD developer mitigation pool, which I believe was 7,000 acre feet for the first 3 years of the plan, and a potential funding gap for Colorado Indian tribes' participation in the system conservation program. And then I was able to announce on behalf of Governor Ducey that he would include in his budget request for 2019 $30 million to fund that system conservation program. I think Ted Kowalski, on behalf of the NGOs, the philanthropic entities, talked about committing $8 million of additional money as well to that program. I also expressed my concerns about the certainty. I agreed certainly with the Pinal and other agricultural users that that certainty needs to be there, but I think all the delegates need the certainty regarding lots of different elements of the implementation plan. We all need to be confident that we're going to be able to follow that plan to the extent the hydrology lets us, and we don't get into a much worse situation than we projected in our implementation plan assumptions. We also acknowledge that certain elements of the plan needed a little bit more discussion, and that we needed to identify and start drafting implementation agreements, which, as Ted alluded to in the agenda, we will go into more detail as part of this meeting.
The week following the last steering committee, the CAWCD board had its regular monthly board meeting on December 6th and took two actions that relate to the drought contingency plan. First action was the board approved support of the key provisions of the Arizona DCP implementation plan that was presented at the steering committee on November 29th, but recognizing the need for additional discussions that Tom was just referring to, to address remaining issues, including certainty for CAP ag and developer pools, and also subject to the approval by the board of the agreements necessary to implement CWCD's commitment to the DCP implementation plan, and also consistent with the board's action taken at the November 15th special board meeting. Action number 2 was to approve the interstate LBDCP agreement and the companion agreement, and authorize the board president or her designee to execute other appropriate agreements, provided those documents reflect the board's capacity to enforce all parties' obligations under the LBDCP in court if necessary. Now, some of you may be scratching your head wondering why that is so complex. Tom and I will have a report later on today on our resolution, we think, of the interstate document signing approach that we've agreed upon, with some final steps we need to take there too. But that was what the board did then in December. I think the next one is mine too. So a recap for everyone of then what is the implementation plan that was presented at the last steering committee meeting. There are 2 components to the implementation plan. One of them is the mitigation component, and mitigation again being all or part of the incremental impact on various water users from the implementation of the DCP, that this impact that would be in addition to where folks would be impacted under the 2007 guidelines. It's not strictly based on that, but that's the underlying premise of what mitigation is. And the mitigation includes both wet water mitigation from CAP deliveries, and also, because there's not a sufficient supply to provide all of the wet water mitigation that would be needed in the mitigation program, some payments for reductions. We call that compensated mitigation when the wet water mitigation is insufficient. And just so that everyone understands, this isn't use up all the water first and then start paying money. There's going to be a careful attempt to manage both of those resources together so that they all last as long as the mitigation program lasts. And the devil's in the details, and drafting the agreements among the parties to make those things happen. There also is money for a new groundwater infrastructure program for the CAP ag pool as part of the mitigation component. The offset component, the goal of that piece of the program is to create system conservation and ICS to replace the CAP ICS that is already in the lake. That will be the primary wet water component of the mitigation program. So that resource is being used, other conservation and ICS is being created that it doesn't have exactly the same timing, but will be created with the goal to replace the CAP ICS that is used. And it includes some pre-firming to address firming obligations for NIA water that is allocated to tribes under the water settlements. This is this one. This is mine too. So we'll dig a little bit deeper now into the mitigation component, the key terms. And all of this is a recap from the November 29th meeting, but it's been a long time, so we're just trying to catch everybody up again. Mitigation program is divided into 3 time frames. There's a 3-year time frame, 2020 to 2022, and 2020 being the year that there's a more than a 50% chance that there's going to be a Tier 1 shortage, and so we're assuming that's what's going to happen. 2020 to 2022, there will be 100% mitigation for the non-Indian ag pool. That will be determined annually, what the mitigation requirement is based on a calculation of what the actual orders are, where the NIA pool would be under the 2007 guidelines, and where it will be under DCP, and what's the difference. And that quantity in aggregate is 100% mitigation for the ag pool. That will be mitigated with a combination of wet water from the CAP resources and some other resources, and some payments from CAP as well. The reason that there needs to be 100% mitigation, among other things, is that in order to do bullet number 2, which is deliver some mitigation water to the CAP Ag Pool, which is a junior priority pool to the NIA pool, in order to do that, you have to have a full NIA pool to allow water to flow to a lower priority pool. So there will be a fixed volume for CAP Ag Pool. It is dependent on the annual tier determination in the proposal that was presented at the last steering committee meeting. It's 105,000 acre feet per year. It would, in that proposal, drop to 70,000 acre feet in the third year if we are in a Tier 2A, which is below 1050, rather than in a Tier 1. After 2022, so beginning in year 4 of shortage in 2023, there is no more CAP ag mitigation, with a couple of exceptions. One is some remaining quantity of EPCOR GSF that would continue to be delivered, hopefully, to the Pinal County Ag Districts, and also the groundwater infrastructure program, which will have been completed in 2022, will continue throughout the period. I'm going to skip actually to, no, I won't. So M&I and Indian priority will be fully mitigated if there is any shortage to the M&I or Indian priority pools, be fully mitigated first, and then the NIA pool will be mitigated 75% under a Tier 1 or a Tier 2A. So that's 1050 and above. And that situation will last as long as we are in one of those two tiers through 2025 until the resources are exhausted, whichever comes first. And then in the event that the hydrology drops us into a Tier 2B, then the NIA mitigation will decline to 50% and remain there until either the end of 2025, supplies of resources are exhausted, or we go into a Tier 3. So in 2026, there will be no mitigation at all, regardless of what tier that we're in. As I already mentioned, the last bullet there will be no mitigation for any water user in a Tier 3 in any year. Now we'll move to the offset program.
So I'll cover the offset program. Again, this program is extremely important to the state. It is, in our minds, linked to the use of ICS, CAP's ICS coming out of Lake Mead, and it is number one of Governor Ducey's principles enunciated in one of his opinion pieces, and so very important to us to make sure that we have the right path forward for this program. Again, it's intended to conserve 400,000 acre feet to offset the use of the CAP 400,000 acre feet of ICS. The methods for creating the offsets, 100,000 acre feet of United States Gila River Community ICS would be created as part of the federal government's firming obligation to the Gila River Indian Community under the Arizona Water Settlement Act. That obligation exists regardless of the DCP or not, and that agreement, that deal is being negotiated between the Bureau of Reclamation and the community. The next piece, 50,000 acre feet of Arizona Water Banking Authority, Gila River Indian Community ICS. And again, that is to fulfill the Water Banking Authority's obligation under the Water Settlement Act to the community. The state law creating that obligation to be completed by the Water Banking Authority. Again, that obligation exists with or without the drought contingency plan, and the Water Bank in the past has already done some pre-firming with the community, sending them wet CAP water, community putting it underground for their future recovery when that firming obligation comes due. And then 150,000 acre feet of system conservation, again, we intend to do this with the Colorado Indian tribes. They came forward with a proposal to Ted and I a bit ago to do 50,000 acre feet of system conservation for 3 years to come up with 150,000 acre feet of water. And again, we already talked about the funding for that. And then 50,000 acre feet of additional tribal intentionally created surplus. The Indian community has offered to do that, create that intentionally created surplus on their own nickel, so to speak, and that would be their water to take out into the future. And for these ICS elements of the offset, there would be a commitment in each case for that water to stay in Lake Mead through the pendency of the DCP. So we would have that guarantee that that offset water is there while the water is coming out. The CAP-ICS is coming out for the DCP mitigation purposes. And then the last 50,000 acre feet would be done through a CAP SRP exchange and payback. We have a later slide on that issue. I think that we'll discuss then, and there is further discussion needed, as you'll see in that slide, on that offset mechanism.
Tom.
Yes.
I thought that I heard, I just want to clarify that the 100,000 acre feet of surplus is for the Bureau's firming obligation to the Tohono O'odham Nation and the White Mountain Apache tribe. So their federal obligation, they don't have a federal obligation to GRIC to firm.
That's correct.
Okay.
Say that again.
The United States does not have an obligation to GRIC to firm. The Water Bank does. We firm Tohono O'odham Nation, White Mountain Apache, and then we have some future firming
Right.
obligation.
Okay,
so I
sorry.
think that was just a little confusion in the slide.
Yeah, all right, sorry.
The supplies are both Gila River Indian Community, but the firming of the first bullet is for Tohono O'odham and White Mountain Apache,
Right.
and the 50,000 acre feet in the second bullet is for the Gila River Indian Community.
Correct.
My mistake there, thanks. So moving on then, I think we can go to the next slide. So at Colorado River Water Users Association meeting on December 13th, the Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner Brenda Berman announced a deadline of January 31st, 2019 for the parties to the DCP agreements in the lower basin to finish their work to complete the DCP. If the parties to that DCP agreement, to the DCP agreements in the lower basin have not completed their work by that deadline, the Department of Interior intends to publish a Federal Register notice asking all 7 basin states to provide, within 30 days of the notice, their recommendations for future department action to address the risks the basin is facing, i.e., how are we going to protect the lake without the DCP? What should the Secretary of the Interior do, is what that really means. And from my perspective, I don't want to be in that position of having to provide those comments, and I don't want to see the other basin states and their water users provide comments too, because I think there's a great possibility that there'll be some, it will result in some real potential divisiveness between the states. I think it's going to be, you should do this and you should do that, and I should be left alone, because that's what I'd do if I was them. And so I'm not sure that's an outcome any of us really wants to go down that path. So I am really hoping we can avoid that outcome. It's not going to be a good one. Yes.
Besides Arizona, who is left to complete DCP work?
So I believe in California that Imperial Irrigation District has approved the documents, but on a couple of conditions. One, they want to see Arizona complete their process so that they have a clear path that Arizona is going to sign. And then they have made a request, I believe, to the federal government for some funding to help them with their salton sea issues. And then Coachella has not acted yet, and Palo Verde has not acted yet. We believe that there are no substantive issues for those entities to deal with, but I think part of their inaction to date has been issues about reviewing ICS exhibits, which we'll get into in a little bit, because as part of the package, we're going to approve each other's ICS exhibits when we sign DCP. So they're waiting, I think, partly to see what that package of exhibits looks like, and maybe there are some other issues, Ted.
And then the upper basin, maybe we're going to cover this. The upper basin, the Colorado River Commission, Upper Colorado River Commission met the day before CRUA and approved the interstate documents. So the 4 upper basin states are completed.
Representative Bowers.
Mr. Chairman, then, as I understand it, who's on first? The IID has not completely made any commitment or signed anything because they're waiting for possibilities of financial settlement to an outstanding lawsuit. We haven't. The Gila River community is also waiting pending our approval from the legislature of the DCP. And who is the last one who is still waiting for approval?
In California, 2 other section contractors, Coachella and Palo Verde. And so I believe, Speaker Bowers, that the IID ask is for issues regarding the Salton Sea, an action that was required to be taken under the quantification settlement agreement that really haven't been taken to essentially do what they can to protect the shrinking sea and avoid potential health issues, potential lawsuits over health issues, et cetera. I'm not sure it's directly related to active litigation.
So, Mr. Chairman, the litigation that was between one farmer in the IID, has that been settled and terminated?
So that litigation, and for people's edification, if I get this right, really revolves around whether or not the Imperial Irrigation District as an entity can reduce the water use of the individual farmers. I think that litigation is ongoing, and we expect that litigation to be ongoing for many, many years. But IID has told us that that litigation won't stop them from approving the DCP and signing it if those other 2 conditions that we talked about are met.
Okay, thank you.
So current status, again, we'll go through this as we move forward in the presentation, but DWR and CWCD have worked over the holidays to identify a number of agreements that will be necessary to effectuate the Arizona DCP implementation plan, and have spent some time drafting. They're in various forms, versions of those agreements. And then likewise, we have outlined potential legislative changes that need to be done to implement certain provisions of the DCP implementation plan, holding true to our original request by the 2 co-chairs to keep that to the barest minimum. And we'll talk about what those are in more detail. Again, DWR's attorneys have taken the lead on the rough cut of drafting that legislation, and I think in next steps we'll get into how we're going to move forward the process with Speaker Bowers and the legislative leadership on coming to conclusion on that legislative package. So moving on, again, we want to get into now what we in shorthand describe as the signing issue. Again, what parties in the state of Arizona need to sign the interstate DCP agreements, and CWCD and DWR and the Bureau of Reclamation have worked out a plan that works for all 3 of the parties in terms of how that signing issue will be handled. So The first bullet is that DWR will sign the companion agreement, and that's the agreement between all 7 states, Upper and Lower Basin, all sign, and all the other LDDCP, Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan agreements on behalf of the state of Arizona. So that will be DWR signing those documents. Those are the documents that have been posted in various places, our websites, Reclamation's websites. CAWCD and Reclamation would then enter into a separate agreement in which each party agrees to implement the terms of the Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan. And I think that also maintains the status quo, in my view, of what CAWCD's contract means and what rights and obligations and authorities they have under that contract vis-a-vis their relationship with the federal government, the Bureau of Reclamation. And then the third piece, Ted and I will exchange letters which talk about how the CAWCD Reclamation Agreement is not precedential. Those letters will reserve our rights vis-a-vis each other, and it's intended to maintain the status quo. The better way to say that is we are agreeing in these letters that CAWCD, however they view their authorities and obligations under their contract, we're not trying to change that. And however DWR views our obligations under state law to represent the state, CAWCD is agreeing not to change that. And we won't use any of these documents in any administrative or legal proceeding if we unfortunately ever got to that place. And then lastly, we would modify the Lower Basin Development, Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan Agreement to include CAWCD as a third-party beneficiary for certain pieces of that agreement, which would allow CAWCD to seek enforcement if enforcement is necessary, if one of the parties doesn't perform, and to participate in certain consultation provisions. So we remember the DCP has triggers for reconsultation if the best efforts of the DCP as it's being implemented don't stop the lake from further crashing into the mud. And so I think this is a very creative package. I think it takes care of the needs of DWR. I believe it takes care of the needs of CAWCD. We don't have documents to share with you yet, but we will. Ted and I have had a discussion with the parties in Nevada and California about this package, especially about the last bullet, modifying the DCP itself. And I believe our lawyers, CAWC and DWR's lawyers, and lawyers representing our counterparts in the other state are putting together a meeting to work on edits to the DCP language itself. So, Ted, do you have anything to add?
No, other than what you had just said is that we just spoke, Tom and I, Friday jointly to the parties in California and Nevada, all the ones that you've heard about in the conversation just a moment ago, and they are interested in a solution, so they were happy that we had managed to work something out. They are also interested in having contract enforceability to make sure that all of the parties to these various agreements are perform. So they are happy with that. Of course, the devil's in the details. They do want to see the agreements, and we'll share those with them shortly. And then lastly is that no one expressed a concern about the need to modify the interstate DCP agreement for the third-party beneficiary changes. At Metropolitan and Nevada, as we just discussed a moment ago, believe that they have the authority to make these modifications without the need to go back to their board, which is a nice thing to have. And now the other ones that have not done that yet are warned that this edit is going to come, and so they can incorporate that into whatever it is that they take to their boards for approval. That there will be last thing that I would add is because of the government shutdown, we have not had availability of folks from the solicitor's office to say, yes, we're fully on board with this thing. But up until February 20th, December 20th, those folks were working side by side with Tom's attorneys and mine to draft those documents. So it would be a huge surprise to find out that somehow in the ensuing 3 weeks that they've changed their mind. So we're very confident that this is going to work.
So I'll ask the delegates, at least for this conceptual outline, knowing as well that the devil in the details, the words on the paper, will matter to all of us when they're finalized. Are there any thoughts or comments any one of the delegates wants to make about this signing solution? Seeing none, we will move on then. And we will talk about the intrastate process for the creation of intentionally created surplus. So you'll recall that we talked with all of you about an Arizona ICS framework that would allow for creation of intentionally created surplus by both tribal parties and non-tribal parties throughout the state. In that regard, and in preparation for the DCP being successfully approved and signed and having these exhibits ready to go so that they would get signed as part of the package, we made it known to folks that we wanted to see their potential exhibits. And we made a call, and on December 31st, we posted the ICES exhibits that came to us, and they came to us from CAWCD, Colorado Indian Tribes, Gila River Indian Community, Mojave Valley Irrigation Drainage District, and Wilton Mohawk Irrigation and Drainage District. On January 7th at DWR, we held an open house so that folks could see the exhibits, ask questions from those entities, what their exhibits were about if they had questions. And really, this is an attempt to create a lot of transparency in this process so that we don't have any last-minute surprises when we get to the point where we have the legislature approving DCP and we're ready to go. We will be confident that stakeholders in Arizona have had an opportunity to weigh in and that we can confidently pitch approval of these exhibits to our colleagues in Nevada and California. So as part of the process, after yesterday's open house, we are taking public comments on the exhibits in writing through January 14th, and then we will have some time to respond if we need to any of those comments. Those exhibits, again, are posted on our website, so you can take a look at them, and if you have any questions before you feel the need to comment, please give us a call and we'll try to get somebody to answer your questions. Also want to make the point that when we pitch these exhibits to our colleagues in California and Nevada, the clearest path forward to getting them approved will be part of DCP signing. That doesn't mean that sometime in the future we couldn't propose additional exhibits, but while we are all collegially moving forward on completing DCP, it will be the easiest path forward to have those exhibits done and approved at that point in time. So that was why part of the reason we also put this process together. We're trying to put this together in a timely manner so that those other California entities who haven't been to their boards might have more clarity on what the ICS exhibits look like when they do go to their boards for approval of the DCP. So any questions about the ICS exhibits in that process? Seeing none, we'll move forward, and I think we're getting into outstanding issues, and I'll turn it back to Ted.
Listed on this page are 4 outstanding issues. There are only 4. I don't want to be overly optimistic because there's a lot of work to do and unanswered questions that you'll see on the next few pages as far as completing agreements and legislative language and things like that. But these four that are on this page have been around to a greater or lesser extent over the last month or two, and Tom and I both have alluded to them in some of our earlier commentary on earlier slides today. Two of them, the first two bullets relate to the ag pool portion of the mitigation component of the Arizona DCP plan. If you will recall that the interim mitigation plan approved by the CWCD board at a special meeting on November 15th included 105,000 acre feet per year for the first 3 years for the ag pool of fixed mitigation. And I won't go through all the history of how that number started out, where it started out, and how it was eventually reduced to this number. But that's what it was in that mitigation, interim mitigation plan. That was November 15th. The mitigation or the DCP implementation plan proposal that was presented to this steering committee on November 29th made some modifications to that. And in year 3, it reduced the 105 number to 70,000 acre feet in the event of a Tier 2 occurring in year 3, 2022. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason for that modification was for parity purposes, that if the hydrology was worsening, then at some point later in the program, the NIA pool would ostensibly receive less mitigation. And so in the minds of some folks, the ag pool then also needed to accept less mitigation if the hydrology worsened in year 3. So that's the background for that. The ag pool participants have asked for greater certainty. Is it 105, 105, 105 for certain for 3 years? There's struggling with that concept for a number of reasons because of maintaining this parity, and also if that additional 35,000 acre feet were to be delivered in year 3, the general impression was that had to come from somebody else. In recent days, there has been an alternative that has been identified of a separate supply of water that would not be part of the mitigation pool. So it would not be a reduction that someone else would have to suffer in order to deliver 105,000 acre feet in year 3. But there still is the perception of a parity issue by some parties. So I think I will leave it at that for now. But take questions one by one. This is what Tom my co-chair, has suggested. So are there any questions or statements about this particular unresolved issue at this time?
So I'm given to understand that there may be a party that could provide the gap in order to fulfill a 105,000 acre feet on year 3. And those details are forthcoming or are yet to be solidified, or how is that working out?
So we have had some discussions with a particular party, and I will leave it up to that party if they want to describe what the offer and what the backup plan might look like. And it's the City of Tucson. Tim Tomier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Speaker. I'll start by saying that City of Tucson's Mayor and Council at the December 4th Mayor and Council meeting voted to support the drought contingency plan as presented on November 29th. So Tucson stands fully in support of the DCP as it was written at that time. We also recognize that there were some gaps that needed to be worked on, and we have developed a proposal that could serve as the backstop on the volume for Pinal agriculture if we did go to a Tier 2 shortage in those first 3 years. of the mitigation period. So this is not mitigation. This is a backstop of certainty of volume. If the DCP were to trigger the mitigation volume to go from 105 down to 70, we, the City of Tucson, have a proposal that we could backstop that 35,000 acre-foot per year difference for up to 2 years in that first 3-year period. This is commensurate with our council's direction to help get DCP to the finish line, but also help solve problems, but at no risk to the City of Tucson. The water that would be delivered to Pinal Agriculture would function in the same way or similar way as the USF to GSF transfer that's been discussed for many of the Phoenix Valley cities, in which Tucson, which has historically ordered and delivered its full allocation to Tucson, would deliver a portion of that allocation to the Pinal Agriculture up to not exceeding 35,000 in up to 2 years. We would pay the OM&R charges that we would typically pay and ask that the Pinal agricultural districts pay the power costs as they do currently for ag pool water. What we would be expecting in exchange is that the water bank would transfer credits in the Tucson AMA to Tucson in exchange for the credits that we would accrue in the Pinal AMA, again following the same pattern as the USF to GSF transfer. In order to have the certainty on water supply to be able to make this offer, there's 4 reforms to the way effluent is managed in the state. The first would be to eliminate the 2025 sunset on the ability to accrue long-term storage credits for effluent. This could be either accomplished through a direct removal of the sunset or the repeal of WaterBud, as has already been contemplated in other parts of the agreement. The second would be to change the way that effluent in a managed recharge facility is credited in the state to achieve parity between the way effluent is treated and the way CAP water is treated. Right now, if effluent is recharged in a managed recharge project, there's a 50% cut to the aquifer. This would be to change that to be only a 5% cut to the aquifer in the case of a long-term storage credit. We would also ask that the change be made to allow those credits accrued under managed recharge to count toward a designation of awards of assured water supply. Currently, they don't count. We are also willing to consider, if it's in the state's best interest, an annual volumetric cap by AMA, if necessary, on the amount of credits on an annual basis that could be credited through managed recharge. This provides some certainty on the supply. These concepts have already been vetted through the Governor's Water Augmentation Council through 2016 and 2017. I will close by saying that this proposal does not diminish the amount of water available for mitigation. It does not take water from any other higher priority user other than Tucson. We traditionally have ordered our full allocation and delivered it to Tucson, so it does not result in a net increase in Tucson's order. It is our standard order that we've been placing for a number of years, other than when we've put water voluntarily in Lake Mead. So the third-party effects should be minimal to none, but we believe it's a prudent thing to do to give the certainty to Pinal Agriculture that they're seeking on volume in the first 3 years.
So I'll weigh in a bit and then allow delegates to ask questions or make comments on this issue. So first I want to thank Tim and Tucson and the council. I think this is a very creative proposal. I understand that there are parties who potentially see a little bit of an upset in the parity in terms of how the entire deal is put together, and Ted mentioned that when he teed this up. I will say DWR is looking at the managed effluent recharge changes that you mentioned. I do want to find a way to limit this. I don't know if the volumetric cap is the right way, but maybe there's other ways that we can think about doing that. I think the method of creating this, or the method of implementing this, in which we would have a complete repeal of WaterBud. We have heard at prior meetings here that a complete repeal of WaterBud may not be acceptable to some of the parties around this table. And so perhaps another way is a better way. And we'll talk later about what we're working towards from DR's perspective on a partial repeal of Waterbud. So I think there's still much work to be done and discussions to be had with parties who may see this upsetting the parity, which is very important, embedded in this deal. So then I'll stop talking and ask if there are delegates who weigh in or ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, on behalf of Pinell County Agriculture, we certainly want to thank Tucson for this creative idea that doesn't seem to hurt anybody else in any way, and will be hugely beneficial to those Pinell County farmers who are already losing substantial water under any plan that we go forward with, or if we don't even go forward with the plan. So this will have some very positive effects and impacts on individuals and businesses and the Pinell County economy in general. And we're appreciative, Tim, to you and your council for crafting this potential solution, and it helped gets us a long ways towards that certainty that we really need out of this process. So, you know, I just really want to express appreciation to the director for his work on this issue as well, and we hope that those steps that need to be taken to make this a reality can occur.
Thanks, Paul. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, is it possible, and to Tucson, did I understand that you may, not you would, but you may accept some type of a cap on the annual managed recharge credits associated with this action?
That's correct, Mr. Speaker.
And would you see, or any of us see, that is it necessary to basically end Waterbud currently, or could it be done regionally or in some way more localized to your area? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
From my perspective, I'm not familiar enough with the full Waterbud repeal and the ramifications of that. The one element of it is a statewide sunset on the ability to accrue long-term storage credits. That's the one key element that, not just for DCP purposes, but for overall water management in Arizona, that's a key piece that needs to be resolved.
Okay.
And before I ask for others, this will come up later, but I'll say it now as well. This will come up later when we discuss USF to GSF, but the Water Banking Authority, in order to complete the credit exchange that Tim talked about, is going to need a recovery partners in Pinell County to make sure they can meet their obligations to the M&I customers for the M&I firming, same as we need for the USF to GSF Phoenix AMA water going into Pinell County. So others with comments or questions?
With regards to the effluent issue, one thing that the change in state law from 50 to 95% for the effluent, it allows the federal government to better fulfill their firming obligation to the Tohono Nation. We have 28,200 acre feet of effluent that the federal government gets, and right now it goes into the Santa Cruz River, and they only get half of what infiltrates, which doesn't, and those credits can only be used to firm the nation or sell it and prop up our cooperative fund. And so them being able to receive 95% of those credits for the water that's left in the Santa Cruz River would be beneficial to the federal government fulfilling their firming obligation to the nation.
So I'll piggyback on that, Josh, and from my perspective, one of the things the federal government is giving up by signing on to DCP as well as others is the fact that it's going to be less likely with the DCP in place that excess water is going to be available in the other excess pool that was going to the GRD, the Arizona Water Banking Authority, and the federal government to fulfill that firming obligation. So that certainly is one of the considerations for me as I've talked with Tim and evaluated this proposal, because it's a pretty big change for the department to agree to move that effluent credit from 50% to 95%. That was done in the 1990s, long before my time at the department, and I understand it was the department's position at the time that there should be no credit given for effluent put into the riverbeds in a managed recharge program, and that the 50% was simply a compromise between the parties who wanted 100% or 95%, and the department who wanted nothing because of the issues of trying to achieve safe yield. So we don't take this change lightly. But again, in the context of the whole DCP package and all the elements of it, it's something that we can get on board with once we get all the details hammered out. So other delegates? Speaker Bowers.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to call it an irony, and that's why I'd like to know if it could be more tailored specifically to the Tucson AMA or in those environs. But the point of WaterBud is to preserve the aquifer, right? And we're all kind of quiet. But when we were talking on the November 15th plan of taking the water that is an ICS formed by the CAP, nobody wanted to empty the dam anymore. So are we talking both sides of our mouth? I mean, that's why I'm saying a more restricted area where we could be more localized, much smaller volume of water, much smaller by comparison. But I guess maybe that's just a rattle that came out of my throat. It is a concern. I don't want, and yet at the end of this, if we don't get, some rain, we're going to be groundwater pumping again out of Pinal County. I mean, so we're trying to keep the wagon moving down the road, creaking, but it's still moving, right?
So I'll add, Speaker Bowers, that as Tim referred to the Water Augmentation Council discussions, it was made clear there, and I think I asked in that discussion to make sure that those folks from those local areas made it clear to me that they could live with the very outcome you're talking about.
Okay.
Kind of increasing that groundwater mining element by doubling those credits, essentially. So that was certainly part of the discussion and the debate in that forum.
Okay, thank you.
Others? Seeing none, we'll move on to the second outstanding issue. So now you know why I said let's do these one at a time?
Oh, I thought you meant one delegate at a time. Okay, well, I guess we're doing both. The second item also relates to certainty for the ag pool mitigation. Taken together, this first item that we just discussed on mitigation in a Tier 2 during the first 3 years for the ag pool, and the groundwater infrastructure program, taken together, the acknowledgement both by Tom and I as co-chairs at the closing of the November 29th steering committee meeting, and the action taken by the CWCD board on December 6th recognized that there was a need for certainty for the agricultural pool, and these are the two remaining things that need to be finalized in order for that certainty. When we talk about certainty for the ag pool participants, but certainty for the rest of us that very important constituency is going to support DCP when it's brought to the legislature starting next week. So the role of the groundwater infrastructure program in the Arizona DCP mitigation component is to provide 70,000 acre feet of groundwater pumping capacity that will come in sometime during 2022, but be fully operational in 2023. How exactly that happens, what overall Peak capacity is needed to provide 70,000 acre feet of groundwater during the growing season to the ag districts. Still are some details that need to be worked out, as does the total cost for that program. There have been discussions of numbers in the $30 million range for that. I think recent discussions that took place in front of the CWCD board at the January board meeting just last week was that that's probably too low. And the basic issue there is that to deliver 70,000 acre feet during the growing season, you need to have a system capacity that's larger than that. Of course, there are part of that conversation is there were opportunities then to use that excess capacity to do other things like recovery and things like that. But I can go ahead from my limited knowledge and try and summarize both the funding status and so forth, but I'd prefer, even though I didn't ask either of you ahead of time, Paul or Leslie to do that, if you're amenable.
Thank you, Ted. It's true that our initial take on the cost of developing 70,000 acre feet of new well production water by 2023 was originally in the $30 to $35 million range until we really did a deeper dive on the issue and realized that we couldn't run these wells all year long in the same amounts, that we really had to be mindful of when the peak irrigation season was, and that was going to require more infrastructure in order to meet those peak demands. So the numbers our engineers and managers have now come up with, and this is roughly 7 districts that have been looking at this on an individual district basis, is closer to $50 million. We have met with the federal government, with Leslie's outfit and with the USDA, NRCS folks, and we are optimistic that an application for funding maybe half the 50 million amount, so say 20 to 25 million, would be well received, but obviously there's no certainty on that at this point, nor will they be at the time the legislature needs to make its decision on DCP. That's just something the timing aspect will not allow in this case. So our goal is to come up with a local cost share of roughly half the amount of the 50 million, because that will help us score much better on the federal match piece of this. And the CAP board generously authorized $5 million for this program last week. The director informs us that the governor's office will support another $5 million, and the repurposing of the Pinnell AMA pump tax, which is roughly $1.3 million a year, but maybe not the full, repurposing the full amount, but most of it during the 7-year mitigation period to help with this process as well. So that combination gets us close to $18 million of local funding. The districts themselves will put up some funds as well as in-kind services to get this done. So I think we're closing in on the 20 to 25 million cost share. But we still appears like, we're going to have to go in to the second half of this with a hope and a prayer. And while, again, Leslie's been very optimistic and gung-ho, and we appreciate that enthusiasm, we are also mindful that this is USDA money is something we're very familiar with, working with through the EQUIP program and other farm programs. It's highly competitive all across the country. And we understand that even the Imperial Irrigation District maybe is looking at the same pot of fund for the Salton Sea funding, which they need to get their approval of the whole program. So we have some genuine concerns about the federal piece on this, but at this point all we can control is really the the local share, and we're pleased that the state and CAP have thus far seemed to be supportive of the local match, and the more local we can get, the better, better shot we have at getting the federal money.
Thanks, Paul. And I just want to add one thing is we've had some really good meetings with the ag districts and with Keisha Tatum, the state conservationist for NRCS in December. And Keisha is here. And so I think it is really helpful that she's participating in these meetings. She's here today if anyone has any questions. But the feds are as committed as we can be.
And so I'll just add, so everyone completely understands, and Paul mentioned that, again, Governor Ducey allowed us to have conversations with Paul and his clients about an additional $5 million ask in the executive budget proposal for this purpose. Certainly, we had expressed support before and continue to support the repurposing of the groundwater withdrawal fee money from Pinal County. Before it was going to be for a different purpose, but now for this groundwater infrastructure program. And really it is an attempt to continue from the governor's office and the governor's perspective to push hard to make the DCP come to closure, to give Pinal Agriculture and CAP Agriculture the certainty they're looking for as much as we can, and to get to the finish line, as Governor Ducey talked about yesterday in his inauguration speech. So again, very important. I think we have a great opportunity here to make all of this happen and create a lot of certainty for the agricultural community to be able to put this program into place in a meaningful way in the right timing for them. So any questions, comments by delegates? Senator Rotondo?
Okay, thank you. I might appear a little bit as a pot stirrer right now, but I'm going to say what I have to say anyway. With this money going towards infrastructure, and we're looking at DOA and other entities, I would like to know if anybody in the development sector will be also putting money towards this infrastructure, as they, in the long run, will be the beneficiaries of this infrastructure.
So I have not had anybody from the development community come forth and offer to put any money into this program.
Thank you. I didn't think they would, but I think it's something that is also a question as we invest our state monies and our federal dollars into something that will, in the long run, be to the benefit of development. And
I'll also point out, Senator Rotondo, that one of the reasons we think, and one of the reasons I think we put this out there and agree to the shifting of the withdrawal fees and this money, is that there are some opportunities here, I believe, as well, with this well program to create recovery opportunities with those wells in partnership with the ag community or their successors, whoever that might be. And I think, as we talked about earlier, the water bank needs, others perhaps need, that recovery partnership opportunity, specifically in the Pinal AMA. So again, one of the benefits in my mind of this program is that there's multi-purposes that can be created as we move forward with this program.
And I would add, Senator Rotondo, too, that as part of the CWCD board's debate leading to the approval of $5 million of funding for this program, the availability of those wells for recovery and alternative purposes was a very important factor in that decision to make my board comfortable with doing that. Aside from the philosophical issue of contributing to pump groundwater, the Central Arizona Water Conservation District doing something like that. But that was a very important consideration for my board that I observed to debate as well.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick question so we can narrow down on what the full need is. So are we still short $7 million of the match, Paul?
I think a portion of that $7 million is coming from the districts themselves. So somewhere, I think in there, we're fairly close. I think we would like to see a little more state commitment, maybe on a backstop if the Fed's money doesn't come through, something along that. But I think as far as the match goes, we're honing in on that.
Okay. Perhaps it's a conversation that we can have maybe offline, but if we can narrow down to a number, it's something that we might be able to look at.
Great, thanks.
So I'll add, Sandy, and Paul maybe wants to add, but at the CWCD board meeting, not to put Mark on the spot, but Mark asked Paul when he was at the podium if he was working on kind of the documentation to show the need and get down in the weeds with all those details. And Paul said, yeah, he's working on it and would share that with all of us. And I think Paul understands the state needs that too. All of us who are contributing money will look at that information. And I appreciate, Paul, that you made that offer to put that package together. It's really important that we have that certainty. And thanks, Mark, for teeing up that issue at the board meeting last week.
And may I just add one more thing? I bring up this point because the 4 legislators that are sitting around this table have been charged with the task to get this through the legislature. And we're dealing with a very wide group of people who come at it with many perspectives. Some believe in supporting the infrastructure while others may not. Some have environmental concerns. Some of those concerns may not be represented at this table. But what we're tasked with is to go to 90 people and in a very quick time frame make sure they understand the intricacies of the water piece that we're putting forth and the money that we're asking them to spend. And so it's with that I bring that up, not to be a bomb thrower, but more for the people in this room to also have a better understanding of what we will confront when this comes to the legislature. And they're valid points because many are watching the dollars that the state is spending, and for good reason. So it's for those reasons that I bring that forth, not to make Spencer hate me for the next session. So thank you, and I just wanted to bring that up to also present some interesting points of view that we will be confronted with in a very short period of time. Thank you.
Bill Garfield.
Tom, Chairman, I just had one follow-up. It's not actually answering the Senator's question, but part of our proposal in the Recovery Plan Advisory Group was in conjunction with developing a recovery plan within Pinal that since our strategy as a water provider is storage and recovery, that's how we work. We're storing water underground, we're recovering it, and we're already geared up to treat the water that comes out of the wells to meet drinking water standards, to comply with standards. So there is an opportunity, I think, subject to where the locations of those recovery wells or those, I'll call them transitional wells that could be used for agriculture, could have some benefit to the local water providers as well. Typically for irrigation purposes, they're constructed, I'll say a little more liberally, looking for wet water as opposed to high quality water can be used for drinking water. But I think there was some opportunity to be able to do that. And that was part of one of my proposals in the RPAG.
other comments? I'll just close by saying again, $30 million proposed by Governor Ducey for system conservation, $5 million for this program, groundwater infrastructure, the repurposing and withdrawal fee, and DWR had already been appropriated $4 million for system conservation. So those are all individual separate items. So we'll have the 30, the 5, the 8 or 9 of the repurposing of the money, plus the $4 million for the system conservation.
Okay, and those were the easy ones. We have 2 more on the list, and we will take a break sometime the day before we end. This next one, the developer CAG mitigation pool. Going back again into history of last year, the CAP interim mitigation plan that was approved by the board, CAP board on November 15th included 7,000 acre-feet per year for the first 3 years of shortage for CAGRD, so-called developer CAGRD pool. At that time, the Gila River Indian Community Grows CAGRD transaction was still pending. It had been approved by the CWCD board. It had not been approved yet by the Gila River Indian Community. Since that time, the Gila River Indian Community has approved the transaction with CAGRD, but it is contingent, the signing of the actual execution of the agreement is contingent on the completion of DCP. And so in our discussions, I believe that CAGRD, the developer home builder community, does not desire to have both the gross CAGRD transaction in place and 7,000 acre feet per year of mitigation water. And many folks, including me, and I will remind everyone that was in the room at I think it was our last steering committee, where Governor Lewis committed that he would do everything that he could to make sure that that transaction was consummated once DCP was completed through the legislature, signed by Governor Ducey. And we appreciate that gesture. But from what I've heard, though, is that the development community home builders, CAGRD, still would desire to have something going into the legislative session that is there for them. That could be replaced potentially by something coming out. So both of these things don't need to occur. If 7,000 acre feet per year is in the plan going in, and subsequently DCP happens, and the grows CAGRD transaction is signed, then this inclusion would be removed. Is that your understanding, Spencer, David? Okay, what it is. The director and I disagree on this. He does not believe that that is necessary. It is definitely a chicken and egg type of thing. Why would you need something to be part of the DCP plan that may prevent the DCP plan from happening? There are other folks who believe that the support of that important constituency is necessary in the legislature to get DCP through. So it's kind of a chicken and egg type of thing. This is an issue. It's a small quantity of water, but it's important. The parity issue comes up again once again here. The whole definition of what mitigation is comes up again here. But this is something that we need to solve quickly before we don't. I am not prepared to ask the legislature to solve this for us.
So let me weigh in a little bit, and I want to first say that we absolutely value the developer and home builder industry and what they provide. But again, I think adding this 7,000 acre feet for 3 years into this plan upsets the balance, the delicate balance in this plan. I'm not sure where that water would come from, but it could potentially reduce the mitigation pool in a way that the mitigation water runs out sooner than later for those who have agreed at the back end of this plan to reduce even their mitigation wants from 75, 50, and then to 0. Also, it was important enough to the governor's office that it was about a year ago that the governor's office reached out to representatives of the Gila River Indian community about potentially doing some kind of Gila River Indian community CAGRD deal to find that water supply for the developers and for the home building community. And I was empowered by the governor's office to have those discussions with the community. I think it got traction with the community in terms of their desire to move forward and jump-starting those discussions with the CAGRD. So that's kind of a combination of the reasons why I think that we have a really good Gila River Indian community CAGRD deal on the table. It's 900,000 acre-feet of water through about 2034, if I have that right or so. It's substantial. It takes care of the GRD needs for 20-plus years. And I think that it's the way to go. That's really the right path forward. And it will reduce the likelihood that we will upset the parity issues and the delicate balance in the implementation plan as we talked about it on November 29th. So I just wanted to explain why we're taking the position that we are and why we disagree with CAWCD on this one.
I will just one more thing, and then I actually would like the home builders to add their comments here, is that for those folks who believe that the GROW's CAGRD transaction is going to happen, and I'm one of them, there should be no threat whatsoever for including this temporary thing that can be replaced by that other thing. It doesn't hurt anybody. So I'll just leave it at that. And Spencer, David, if you would like to speak, please do.
Sure. It's an honor to be the first issue brought up that I think Ted and Tom have disagreed on. So puts me. I'm kidding. But to both the comments related to the GROW's GRD deal, it is in our view, arguably a historic deal. And we're grateful for the efforts of DWR to work with the community to advocate for that transaction. We're grateful to the community for participating in that transaction. I think it's hopefully it's not the only deal that the GRD does with the GROW's project. And so to Tom's point, it takes care of supplies to 2030, 2034, depending on the pace of growth. And I couldn't be happier about that for our membership, as our members are as happy as well. So, but having said that, like everybody around the table, we're seeking certainty. And there is uncertainty on the DCP plan going through the legislative process, not because any major component here necessarily, but any legislation going through the legislative process has uncertainty as things are considered in the public forum and the policy debate down there. We have sought certainty from day one for economic development. We wanted, that's why we're doing DCP. At the end of the day is to ensure that Arizona and the basin states have a plan to deal with lower lake levels on Lake Mead. And in addition to that, my members are seeking certainty as it relates to investment from our corporate offices that are located all across Arizona when that shortage is triggered, that regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the time, regardless of the plan, regardless of any type of GRD purchase or not, that there is a reliable supply for the GRD, which is, according to our rough calculations, about 50% of the housing market are housing permits in Maricopa and Pinal County. And so that's all we're asking at today. We've compromised on this issue. We started at, our original request was 30,000 acre feet. We're down to 7. We, as Ted pointed out, we are fine with this supply going away once the GROW's GRD deal is consummated. and secure to provide that certainty. So this is a conditional supply, as I would put it. We're not trying to seek two different supplies. The last point I'd just like to make is the GRD Grows deal was essentially separate from DCP. It was. It was a separate transaction between the GRD and the Grows project. Now it's not. Now it is become a part of the DCP discussions, not to my liking. I wish I wasn't a part of this discussion to a large degree, and we can move on and move on with that transaction, but we're not. And we want to have that certainty at the end of the day without the need for both transactions, just one or the other. That's all we're asking. And so if one happens, the other one can go away. And I think that's a reasonable request to ensure that development can move forward regardless of the conditions on the lake during this 7-year program.
Ted?
Governor Lewis.
Thank you.
David, Cheryl.
I just want to, just to preface this by saying that I've been very optimistic for some time that DCP would come together. Since November, we've been making some great strides together, I think. And I believe that while we have some issues still outstanding, we have crossed that point of no return. And DCP is no more likely than not to move forward. We will do all we can as the Gila River Indian community to help move this across the finish line. If we can be flexible, we will. I think history shows that. If we cannot, we will be clear with what our position is and why. Now, in regards to the developer pool, there appears to be, I think, some misunderstandings here that I want to clarify about the nature of myself as governor's role and our community council pursuant to our Constitution and their conditional approval of this CAGRID deal, which somehow has resulted in this issue coming up again after we thought it was disposed of and in December. I agree, I thought this issue was dealt with, and I hope that we wouldn't be still talking about this issue as we're doing today. The council resolution is self-executing. Once Governor Ducey signs a DCP that he believes meets the conditions set forth in his op-ed, I believe there were a lot of people there yesterday at Governor Ducey's inauguration, and he made that very clear that that was part of his goals as governor in his second term, that I would be instructed by our council to execute this CAGRID deal. The council will not revisit the issue unless Governor Ducey does not sign the DCP legislation, because he does not believe he can and still meet the conditions set forth in his op-ed. But what I can do, as I've always done, is try to work with this body, with this steering committee. I will consult with my council. I know I have Councilman Barney Enos here as well. We've been facilitating with our 17-member council, keeping them apprised of what is going on here. So we will continue to consult with our council and see if we can perhaps maybe get the authority to send a letter to Ted and Tom clarifying this point as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Governor Lewis. David?
Thank you, and thank you, Governor Lewis, for your comments. I think we've certainly seen some progress and greater level of certainty as time has gone by, which we're certainly appreciative of. What I would say, and I agree with Spencer's characterization. I think we've been pretty consistent from the beginning what our perspective and interests are. I think we saw an example just a few minutes ago with Pinal Ag in Tucson Water, and we're certainly supportive of, at least conceptually, of the framework of the points outlined by Tim, and so we're encouraged by that. I think what we're looking for is a similar backstop And I think as Ted described, if we're all confident that this deal is going to be approved, in which we are, that we don't think it's a big lift to have some sort of language that would be included in conditions should something happen that's out of our control from those around the table. And that being said, we'd certainly be open to any other kind of creative solutions like we saw with Tucson Water and Pinal Ag for addressing, providing a level of certainty to the development community through this process.
Thank you. We as well, I'm representing the development interest, have been consistent throughout this process. We have not been asking for what's been deemed developer water. We have testified twice at the CAP board meeting to that fact. As well, I think on the November 29th, we supported that agreement without the development water. Our folks are the developers. We are large landowners across the state in the CAGRD service area. They include Brookfield, Harvard Investments, Eldorado Holdings, Sunbelt Holdings, Ryan Companies, Kitchell, DMB, Van Trust. All of these entities are very specifically involved with CAGRD and are not asking for this water. We have full faith in the negotiations that have occurred between CAGRD, GROWS, and the Gila River Indian community that this will move forward. As well, as Tom mentioned, at this point, I don't know where we're going to come up with 21,000 acre-feet of water. That will have to reopen these mitigation discussions that we still have discussions about in terms of filling the gap on water. I just don't see the need for it. In fact, we're one of the only entities, if not the only entity, getting new water out of this entire discussion. It is a separate deal, separate and apart from DCP. We appreciate Governor Lewis. I do agree with Spencer where this should have remained separate. It is what it is, but we have full faith that it will move forward. So I respect to disagree with our home builders. We do not support this.
Paul Orm.
My clients have made it very clear to me how important the home builders in Pinal County are to the districts themselves and to the county in general. And I agree with David that we need to look at some creative ways to help backstop the developer group in this matter. I think it can be done. Certainly, we're happy to utilize our political capital any way we can to see if we can't make it happen. But I think they're a very important part of this process, very important constituency in the state as a whole, and in particular in Pinal County. And I think we need to find a way to make this work for them.
Okay, I guess that's the answer. Any other delegates? Oh, yes, Sandy and then Cynthia.
Yeah. I struggle with this just because what I'm hearing from the Gila River Indian community is there's a deal. I mean, it's all contingent on DCP going forward, so I don't understand backstopping a deal that's already a deal if the Gila River Indian community is going to move this forward should DCP go through. So having two pools of water, one water pool, not knowing where it might come from, is a little confusing to me. So I guess I'm just struggling with that. If it's so important, we only have so much water to put up for mitigation. It would have to come out of one of the other two pools, either ag or NIA. And I'm not sure either pool is going to be willing to give that up, unless I'm hearing something different. I guess that's the question back to the ag pool and the NIA pool. Are you willing to give up the 7,000 acre feet? If it really doesn't matter anyway, because the GRIC deal is going to go through if DCP goes through. Does it just convolute it? That's the question, I guess.
Are you asking me or NIA? Well, no. Obviously, if the concern from us is the uncertainty. if anything were to happen, obviously moving forward with the DCP plan, and it wasn't satisfactory to either the governor or whomever decided to decide this deal, that would leave the GRD and economic development without any supply, and the service of backup supply. That's the issue. And so if there was a conditional backup supply, that would at least provide certainty.
So if DCP didn't go through, you'd have the... They're out of water. Yeah, I mean, if DCP doesn't go through, you don't get any.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And if it does go through, the conditional supply goes away.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so can we backstop it with the ag pool, or, I mean, I guess I don't know. I'm trying to find where that water is right now.
Well, I'll try and answer that question.
Yeah.
It's not defined, but it would come off the end. So who's getting mitigated last at the end is the NIA pool. Because the ag mitigation and the developer pool mitigation happens earlier in time when there's resources available to do it. So the worst assumption is the assumption that you need to make, which is that it comes out of the NIA pool. Cynthia.
There are a number of issues with this that have already been identified in terms of there is no water, to include that, as I think everyone at this table understood, when we did this deal, we understood exactly how much water was available and how much offset it was going to require, and that was balanced. To include water now for a party that has no right to Colorado River water, no right to Colorado River water, is not only, it's a little bit, it's quizzical at best, because it's hard to understand how this even works. But I think the concern that the city of Phoenix would have is that there is even the idea that we would add new allocations of Colorado River water to this deal, which effectively this does, or purports to do, which the legislature has no authority to do, and more importantly, there is not enough water to go around for the current LRTs. And so to suggest that it's coming out of long-term contract holders who have paid for and have a right to the water when it's available and have agreed to do this deal, that have made tremendous concessions for agriculture, which at least agriculture has a settlement agreement. But to now add a new party altogether is unthinkable. I ask the question, there are a number of cities, small cities I might add, who are on the list for an NIA reallocation. They're not getting any water under this deal. I'm sure Prescott, Payson, any number of water users throughout the state would love to be added to the roll of Colorado River users. But there simply is not enough water. And so I don't even understand the context of this, because we're talking about something that's imaginary that can't be done in the context of no DCP. And if there is a DCP, I believe the Gila River Indian community has stated numerous times that their council has passed a self-executing contract that would take care of their concerns, which, by the way, they didn't have to do either, but they did. And so I'm really befuddled as to the purpose of this, but I'll end my comments just by saying very clearly, the city of Phoenix will not support a DCP that includes that.
Tom, thanks. I would echo what Cynthia just said. We couldn't support DCP with this. It's new magic water. I don't know what pool it would come from. We are also in line for NIA reallocation. I'd rather have that. So I think the guarantees are in place to make this as strong as anything. And so I'll just keep it short and concur with Cynthia.
Cheryl again.
May I ask a process question of how we're going to resolve this?
I was about
May I ask for a poll? I'm serious. Can we take a poll?
What I was about to suggest, Cheryl and everyone else, is that we're not going to solve this here. Why don't we rely on the offer from Governor Lewis to clarify the self-executing nature of the Community Council resolution, and have a further discussion with particularly the home builders and the community. And of course, Tom's organization, and I will be involved in that as well, and see if we can narrow this gap.
And I think we'll include in those conversations those who have expressed their either support or opposition around this table.
Yeah, I mean, we would want to be part of that.
Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to reiterate some of the things that Tom said regarding our gratitude to the Gila River Indian community for meeting with us late last year, to put together the parties to have a conversation about getting the Groves deal done. We do value the economic development that comes from the home building and development communities a great deal, and recognize its importance in the state. Also, we very much appreciate the action taken by the council for a self-executing document, and the offer to provide a clarification letter. My question to the home builders is, will such a letter help alleviate some of the questions and concerns that exist? Because if we go through that process and it still doesn't take care of your concern, we're still in the same place. So my understanding is this is a contract that is ready to be enacted, which means it is enforceable in a number of different venues, or could be enforced. So my question is, will such a clarification letter help on top of contractual obligations, council action, and so forth?
To answer your question, sure, it would help. I mean, we'd obviously like to look at what that letter said, but yeah, absolutely, it could help.
We're moving on. Okay. Let's move on to the last issue on the page, and then we will take a break after this. CAP SRP exchange. So back to some history. The mitigation component of the Arizona DCP proposal that was presented to the steering committee on November 29th included a quantity of water that was 10,000 acre-feet per year for 5 years that would be delivered as part of the mitigation supply by the Salt River Project as part of the mitigation to common customers shared between SRP and CAP. The exchange part of that transaction would be then that a CAP would set aside or pledge an equivalent portion of its ICS in Lake Mead rather than delivering it to SRP, who would keep that, and that ICS would be kept in Lake Mead through the period, through 2026, and thereby would become 50,000 acre-feet of the offset program, because 50,000 acre-feet less of the CAP ICS supply would be used for mitigation. It would be SRP water instead. So that CAP SRP exchange was included in both the mitigation plan and the offset plan. Since that time, CAWCD has identified a number of concerns about that: contractual concerns, legal concerns, hydrological concerns, potentially financial concerns about the workability of that program. And I can go into details if folks want to hear what those concerns are, but proposed an alternative to that. That, of course, the base case would be CAP delivers all of its ICS and doesn't need an SRP exchange to make those deliveries. That would take care of the mitigation side of the equation, but how do you fill the hole in the offset program? So our suggestion was CAP has got 80,000 acre feet of unallocated excess water in the 2019 annual operating plan. At the present time, that would be pledged to, as system conservation, to the offset, similar to the intentionally created surplus that will be created in 2019 that will also become part of the offset program. This concept was discussed with a number of parties and was specifically rejected by the Gila River Indian community. And we learned today that the expectation is that that CWCD would agree to, number one, both the CAP SRP exchange as originally described and commitment to leave this 80,000 acre feet in Lake Mead in 2019 as part of the baseline going into shortage, which is a surprise to me and reduces CAP's operational flexibility for what may be, as the year wears on in 2019, the best use of that excess water. So at this point, we have not come to agreement. I think there needs to be additional conversation with the Salt River project. For instance, one of our concerns is what happens if that 50,000 acre feet is planned. I don't expect an answer today, Dave. What happens if that 50,000 acre feet is pledged to SRP to leave in until 2026, at which point the 2007 guidelines will have expired, something new will be in place, and if we're below 1025, that ICS may not be accessible for a long period of time, if ever. And would that be acceptable to SRP, or would SRP be coming back and saying, well, then you need to give us something else to make this an exchange, or some money, or something like that? So these are the type of things that need to be sorted out to solve this problem. So there may be a solution of how to do the SRP CAP transaction in a way that makes some of those risks go away. I've not heard one yet that satisfies our concerns about being required to contribute this 80,000 acre feet as part of the DCP plan, basically, without counting toward anything. So at that, and we can ask questions and answer questions, but we don't expect to solve this today. Tom.
So I'll make you happy, Spencer, and let you know that here's another item we don't agree on. And your comment was actually important because I want to say that the fact that there's so few items that we don't agree on really is an amazing place to be, and it has taken tremendous amount of work by Ted and his staff and compromise with my staff and me, and I think you have no idea how much compromise and how difficult those paths forward have been over the last few months, and I give Ted and his staff great credit for getting to that place so that we can have a minimal number of disagreements that we need to work through to deliver DCP. So I'll start off by saying this concept of leaving water in the lake, this excess water as system conservation, has been a tremendous tool. CWCD board has done a great job. It's been critical, along with other programs, to keep us out of shortage currently and for many years. And so I want to applaud the board again for that outcome, but in this situation, we were kind of expecting this water to be kept in the lake based on prior discussions, and in discussions between CWCD and DWR throughout the year. I think there were different ideas about how we might use this water, put it here, put it there. None of those really made sense in that context either. But I'll say this and get to the point, really, that conceptually, when Governor Ducey's first principle about building elevation in Lake Mead was put together, it was in the anticipation that this water would not be in that baseline, and that it would be quote-unquote new water. Some of that new water is intentionally created surplus. Some of that new water is system conservation, as we discussed in an earlier slide. So we don't want to see this as the alternative. We definitely need this piece of the offset to get to the 400,000 acre feet, and we need to find a path forward that doesn't rely on past actions, water staying in the lake in 2019, or tolling any water that stayed in the lake in prior years as system conservation water. So that's our position, and I'd like to hear from folks around the table what they think. And like Ted said, there's no way we're getting to the end of that discussion today, but if folks have strong feelings about either Ted's proposal or what I just said, I'd like to hear them.
Stay far, far away from that one.
And everyone wants the break.
So,
And again, if you think about this some more during the break and we get to the delegate comments, we can certainly revisit and be happy to hear your thoughts at that point in time.
After
Ted, but I just wanted to reiterate the council's and the community's opposition to the CAP-SRP exchange. As you know, as was said by Ted, the community, or by Tom, the community is not willing to support any changes to the proposed SRP, CAP, ICS, intentionally created surplus exchange at this time. There is no way my council will agree to the use of CAP 2019 system conservation as part of the ICS program. I believe that this is pretty much a non-negotiable item, and again, I will confirm that with my council this Friday.
Yeah, so it's break time. When we come back from break, we do have a few more things to do before we get to delegate comments and public comments, and that would be the list of agreements, other actions that need to be taken, and potential legislation, and then we'll move to delegates and public comment. 10 minutes.
Okay, so we're going to start with a discussion of the list of agreements and actions related to the mitigation component of the implementation plan, and Ted is going to lead us through that discussion.
So the list, you can do this first. The list of agreements that we've identified so far, and hopefully this will be all of them that there are, on the mitigation side, and then in the next page, Tom will go through a list of agreements and actions on the offset component of the DCP implementation plan. First of all, even though DCP, we talk a lot about DCP as a package, but it consists of a collection of individual transactions between usually a small number of parties. But ADWR and CWCD are evaluating the concept of, is there some way to memorialize the kind of the whole thing together as how all the pieces fit in some kind of memorandum of understanding or some other type of document. And I think as we put the pieces together, individual pieces together, it may become more clear about how we would go about doing something that's more comprehensive. So the second bullet through the end of this page, there will be an agreement or agreements between CAWCD and specific CAP ag districts that will receive mitigation during the first 3 years. And you'll begin to see the pattern here after we go through a couple of these. There will be likewise an agreement or series of agreements between CAWCD and the participants in the 9 participants in the non-Indian agricultural pool for their mitigation. We had a productive meeting this morning with NIA pool participants to begin to discuss some of the mechanics about how that would work. That's a little bit more complicated because there's water mitigation and there's money mitigation, and the real issue to resolve there is how do you make sure that you have enough of each and you don't use up one before the other, so that everybody gets mitigated as long as there's resources available. There's a sub-bullet there, is that there are, we won't get into it today because we don't have time, and it just involves only a couple of parties, to clarify how federal and state firming calculations will apply to the Gila River Indian Community and Tohono O'odham Nation during NIA shortages. This is an action item. The next bullet is USF to GSF agreements. There will be, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe 2 sets of agreements there. One will be between the cities that are relocating their water storage from a USFs to GSFs and the ag districts that will be the beneficiaries of the GSF deliveries, number one. And then on the other side will be an agreement between the cities and the Water Banking Authority with respect to the credit exchange. I think there are 2 sets of agreements. Cynthia's not here, but she would be able to probably correct me or modify me if it's one giant agreement instead of 2 sets of agreements, but you get the idea. There also will be, we're calling it, for want of a better word, GSF to GSF agreement between EPCOR and the CAP ag districts for the relocated GSF storage that would move from Phoenix AMA to Pinal AMA.
Could I make a correction or addition to that?
Sure.
Those agreements also require an agreement with the Arizona Water Company as the recovery partner with the GSF to GSF.
Okay.
And there's also, coupled with that, is the discussion about long-term storage credits and at least a limited repeal of water bud as it relates to the ability to do that kind of an exchange.
Right. I know that the limited repeal of water bud is on the legislation list, but and as a matter of fact, probably Tom and I should mention that the USF to GSF agreement that we just talked about, the bullet before, and also this Tucson backstop to the ag pool that involves a credit exchange also would require a recovery partner for the Water Banking Authority for the Pinal credit, similar to what you're talking about.
Right, but specifically for this one bullet point, our name should be added to that list as part of the agreement as well. Thank you.
We'll do that. I don't see any of my staff in here, but we've got a video, so we'll pick it up there. Doug.
And I should also mention that logistically, it's going to require an official exchange agreement, so that we'll have to go through that process with the state as well. So there's a couple other pieces.
Okay. We talked about already the CAWCD and the SRP exchange agreement. If that happens, then there obviously will be an agreement. The next one, CAP Ag District groundwater infrastructure funding commitments. So at some point, those will need to become solid commitments, agreements for the funding to be contributed into some kind of participation agreement or something like that among all the participants in the United States, et cetera. Water Banking Authority M&I firming policy statement and clarification. I'm not sure that I can explain this one, Tom.
So in the implementation plan, there was no mitigation for M&I subcontractors because the assumption was that the water bank would, and it's a small amounts of water, but firm those M&I subcontracts so they'd end up with all their water essentially, no need for additional mitigation. There's no policy to that end right now by the bank. It's something the bank would have to agree to do. And the issue there is, from my perspective, we do have a finite amount of credits in the water bank. It doesn't look like we're going to get excess water anytime soon to increase the number of credits. So, of course, there has been discussions in various points in time about recovery in this issue, both when I was on the water bank, when I worked for Phoenix, and now that I'm on the water bank as the director of the DWR, about a policy discussion on should the water bank be recovering credits, assigning credits, whatever, before there was some additional actions taken by the recipients of those M&I subcontracts to do certain, I use the word curtailment, not conservation of their water use. And I describe it, should the water bank be recovering finite credits that are largely not renewable so Tom Bashosky can water his front lawn. So I'm willing to pitch to the water bank to let this happen through 2026 because we need it
as part of the mitigation plan, but it's going to be limited to this time period, in my mind, and that policy needs to be revisited when we get past 2026 and look at recovery and how the water bank's going to distribute credits out into the future post-DCP. So that's what that issue is.
Next on the list, this is not an agreement, this is an action item, is that it should say board and council approvals, and maybe there are other governing bodies that need to be, every single one of these things is going to have multiple parties, more than one party to it, is going to have to take it to somebody else to approve. We'll get to this later when we talk about timeline, but it will be a challenge to get these drafted and circulated and conceptually agreed to by principals by the January 31st deadline, let alone schedule all of these for board and commission approval. That will be a challenge that we're going to have to deal with, and also discuss with the United States about how done is done. But we need to do the work first, and then we'll have the other conversation. Next page, offset.
Okay.
Or did Senator Otondo have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Ted. So in earlier meetings, there were discussions of using the cap 4-cent tax for creation of ICS and for M&I firming for a portion of the offset component, and that concept I haven't seen today. Where are we at with that, and why hasn't it been in the presentation?
That component of the offset plan, which is 50,000 acre feet of tribal ICS that would be created, does not necessarily require 4-cent tax funding up front. There will be some ongoing discussions potentially about how that ICS is maybe utilized and by whom, but my understanding is that the Gila River Indian community is prepared to create that 50,000 acre feet of ICS on its own.
Right, and I talked about that earlier in one of the slides.
Okay.
And I will say that CWCD and DBR have had a lot of discussions, and I think when we presented this on the 29th, I think we made it clear that we hadn't had time at that point to fully discuss it with CWCD. So having heard CWCD's concerns over the last couple of weeks, we are in agreement with CWCD that we should take that off the books. And again, we have this alternative, i.e. the Gila River community doing that ICS, like I said earlier, under at their own cost. So we're filling the offset requirement a different way that doesn't have to put CAP's concerns at issue.
Thank you, and once again, thank you to the Gila River Indian community for their cooperation.
Okay, so list of agreements and actions related directly to the offset component. Obviously, we've talked about lots of ICS creation as part of the offset. So we need to finalize the Arizona ICS framework agreement. We've talked with you all about this on several occasions. There's a couple of outstanding issues we're trying to work through, and I'll describe them this way. One issue is the process for how we present the ICS exhibits to our colleagues in Nevada and California. And then second, how we describe the right, quote, unquote, the right of CAP settlement tribes to do ICS in their name. And there's a lot of pieces to that issue that we're trying to work through, and we have to get the language exactly right. There's very touchy issues on all sides with that particular issue. So we're continuing to work through that one. The United States and the Gila River community have to do their pre-firming agreement, as we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. The Water Bank and the Gila River community have to do their pre-firming agreement. And then we are putting together a system conservation funding and implementation agreement to do the Colorado Indian tribes system conservation. Again, parties being, or the parties that are involved, either directly or indirectly, are Arizona, the NGOs who are coming forward with money, Colorado Indian tribes, and CWCD, at least for the reason of needing to forbear the ability to take that water as they have done when the Colorado Indian tribes created system conservation under the pilot system conservation program. And when we get to the legislative pieces of this, there's some linkages to some of this that we'll talk about on that slide. So I talked in detail earlier about the completion and the approval of the new ICS exhibits and the process that we're undergoing there. An issue that I don't know that we've talked about before is that we have a limit under the ICS currently in the 2007 guidelines in terms of how much ICS you can create in any year. There are also limits on total accumulation volume and delivery capacity. But the volumes of water that might be done in 2019 and 2020 can exceed that 100,000 acre-foot limit. The DCP contains a provision that would allow one state who's not using all of their capacity to let another state borrow it temporarily for that year. And so we need to put an agreement in place so that we can do potentially more than 100,000. We've had some preliminary discussions with Nevada who have stepped up to help us there. And if they don't have enough capacity, if we still don't have enough capacity, we'll reach out to California. So we need to put together an agreement essentially between DWR and Nevada on that item. The interstate ICS additional aggregate capacity agreement. So again, part of DCP is that Arizona gets an increase first from 300,000 to 500,000. That's completely done. But then an additional 100,000 acre feet that was recently agreed to late last year, and that related to Nevada backstopping California's reductions. That's a very short and simple way to say that. Maybe not the way some would want to describe it, but that's the short and long of it. And as part of that, as part of Arizona's agreement to allow that to happen, we're going to get another 100,000 acre foot of aggregate total accumulation capacity volume. That effectuates the split between tribal and non-tribal, where there's 300,000 for the tribal and 300,000 for the non-tribal. So we can have a robust program there that creates a pretty large benefit to both groups. And remember, we had talked at one earlier steering committee meeting, several people had raised the issue that we should try to get as much accumulation, total accumulation volume as we could as part of DCP. And that was part of the comfort level we had, Ted and I, and others, when we had the discussion with Nevada and California about this backstop idea. And we had Wade Noble in that discussion as part of the Arizona contingent in 7 Basin State meetings or Lower Basin State meetings, and Mojave County Water Authority, represented by Maureen George at the time in those discussions. So that's what that item is. And then identifying and creating agreements for Pinal AMA recovery partners. And now we need to add in, if we pursue the Tucson offer, Tucson as well as the Phoenix AMA, so that we can do the credit exchange. And again, it's really important that we have those recovery agreements in place so that we can make sure the water bank can fulfill the M&I firming that it needs to do out into the future. So a discussion of Arizona legislative package items. And at this point, and we'll have more of a discussion how to move this legislative package forward, and Speaker Bowers will jump in, I think, in part of that discussion. But just listing out what we see, and obviously we need the joint resolution authorizing the DWR director to sign on to the Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan on behalf of the state of Arizona. We need the funding for the system conservation and the groundwater infrastructure. Again, so Governor Ducey's proposed budget, $30 million and $5 million, and then the repurposing of the Pinal groundwater withdrawal fees, largely for groundwater infrastructure, but again, we had talked about need a small piece for conservation and assistance programs important to other stakeholders in Pinal County, water education, Pinal County Water Augmentation Authority, and irrigation management services provided to the farmers to help with their management of their farms and their efficiency requirements. A small amount of money, somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 for a couple of 3 years as that fund is dwindling, so that we didn't have to raise the groundwater withdrawal fee by 25 cents and create another hit on those who pay that fee, largely the Pinal farmers. And then the limited repeal of WaterBud. And so we had heard at one of these meetings that perhaps the repeal should be not a total repeal. And so here's the concept that at least the DWR has put forth for your consideration, and that would be a two-part requirement. First, that the long-term storage credit would be accrued if the water is going to a groundwater saving facility. So requirement number one. Requirement number two, and both have to be met, that there's a water management benefit created in the AMA in which the groundwater savings facility exists. So just for example, in the situation where Phoenix water would go into, where this EPCOR water would go into Pinal, and their ones water butted out, they could not get a long-term storage credit. So the water would be going to the GSF, to farmers in Pinal, and the water management benefit could be the fact that it's 13,000 less acre-feet of groundwater that farmers would pump. That's a water management benefit in my mind, and that's just an example. I'm not predisposing the outcome of such a decision, but give you a flavor for some of the things that might work. So, and then authorization for the water bank to exchange withdrawal fee credits. So it's clear that within each AMA, the water bank already has existing legislative authority to do that, but crossing the AMA boundaries, as we're talking about doing, we want to make sure that we have all our bases covered legally on that one. And then there is a $250 transfer, long-term storage credit transfer fee per transaction, and we're proposing to waive that fee, which we need legislative action so that those putting up this water and getting these credits don't have to pay that $250 fee. We will eat that cost within our existing budget, DWR, who processes those applications for those transfers. And then last, DWR authority to act as the fiscal agent for the NGO contribution for CRIT system conservation. So in the pilot system conservation program, the federal government was that fiscal agent. There are some concerns about whether or not the federal government is authorized to do that for this system conservation program, which is not part of the pilot program. And so I will get, hopefully, the legislature will approve the $30 million for DWR. There's no issues there with me handling that money and paying it out. But to be sure that I can accept the NGO money and then have the authority to spend that money, we're looking for a legislative authority to make sure that all works properly. So I'll stop and ask for comments or questions on any one of these bullets. Tim, and then Bill, and then Senator Rotondo.
My comment would be that there would be some additional items added to this list if the Tucson backstop proposal is put into the deal.
So we understand if the Tucson backstop proposal works that we also need to add to this list the managed effluent issues that you raised before. So Bill.
Thank you, Tom. My comments are mainly on the limited repeal of WaterBud. I know the GSF exchange we're talking about with EPCOR requires the ability to exchange credits. So clearly that's critical for us to be able to store water, have EPCOR store their water down in Pinal, and for us to allow them to effectively in future years take the cap water that we otherwise would receive in Pinal and then recover the credits that were stored in an earlier time period. That's sort of step number one. Step number two is with the the groundwater infrastructure as part of the DCP plan, we know that's going to increase groundwater pumping, and it's going to put more pressure on the physical supplies in Pinal, which we already know are sort of at a very limiting stage at this point. And if you remember, in 2017, we had the governor's water conversation on a number of issues, but the Pinal lack of physical supplies was one of those. And some of the stakeholders that I've been talking to, and that was one of our charges, was to go out and have outreach to a larger group of people who are not in here as part of the steering committee to garner support for the DCP plan. The concerns that I'm hearing is with increased pumping, how are these communities going to be able to bring new businesses in where supplies are limited? Well, part of the solution, I believe, and this is not the forum to identify the solutions to physical supplies, but part of the solution could be the amount of water that's already stored in the Pinal AMA, and there's approximately 3 million acre feet, not all accessible, not all in names of folks who could actually do a credit transfer or selling those credits, but that represents a physical supply of water that we cannot currently purchase to meet the needs of new businesses that would come into the communities that we serve. And businesses like Lucid Motors and Nikola, those businesses alone represent probably upwards of 6,000 employees that could be brought into the area, a huge economic impact to the area, in excess of $3 billion just between those two projects based on what they've presented to the various cities for where they brought sort of those details of those projects forward. So for those communities that are looking for how things are going to work for them going forward, having an ability to have the local water provider be able to get access to water already stored down there, but where we're currently limited under water bud, we think is an important component. And then the other comment, I think, concerns probably Tim's discussion about repealing the 2025 sunset for reclaimed water. We believe that's also critical, and it should be part of the overall effects. I mean, we support full repeal, but we understand if that's not possible, we should at least get those portions repealed that make everything work that we're trying to accomplish here. Thank you.
So you're asking to consider a situation where somebody who's currently restricted by water bud from getting a long-term storage credit is also restricted from going out and purchasing a long-term storage credit and transfer it into their account. And you're asking for that to be part of the repeal?
Yes, that's correct, because, I mean, for example, the Groves project that has water stored in Pinal, I think it would be great to be able to bring that supply into the use for the area rather than having those credits, pumped and recovered and brought somewhere completely apart. And I just think it makes sense to do it that way. We know it's not all going to end up in Pinal probably, but and because each of those years in which those water was stored has sort of a time stamp on it, and the test for whether you can actually purchase those credits and eligible, it basically says you have to replace all the water you pumped in that year. And so you'd have to buy thousands of acre-foot of credits before you could get the first credit you would use for a new user. So it's just a very cost-prohibitive setup the way it is currently. And I would think the communities we serve and other water providers in the area are looking for the same kind of solutions out there that I'm talking about here.
So I know there are delegates that have expressed concern about the full repeal. I don't know what they would think about this additional repeal on top of what I described. DWR has already kind of written up, but I'm willing to go back with my staff and think about the ramifications of what you're saying and try to think about what the consequences might be for that change. And I don't know if folks who've expressed concerns about a more full repeal want to weigh in at this time about Bill's request, but you're obviously welcome to do so if you would like to. Spencer.
We've had concerns about the repeal of water bud, for the kind of same reason you're trying to help Pinal County. We don't want to draw water out of the ground unnecessarily in that AMA. So, but having said that, as I've talked in previous meetings, we'd consider any proposal, I think you'd have to put it on paper to gauge our level of support or hatred, depending on what you write down. But so we need to see it and think it through.
Anyone else on that issue? Senator Otondo.
Thank you, Director. I just, we're talking about the Arizona legislation, and I'd just like to point out that there are several other legislators in the audience today in the group that are not part of this committee nor alternates, but are here and are learning and dedicating their time because they know what we face. And so I just wanted to recognize all the legislators that are also here and their staff, so that you know we're not just sitting on our laurels. We're anxious to find out how this will be presented to the legislature, in what form. Is it mirror bills? Is it an omnibus? And so can I just ask the legislators in the audience to please stand up? Oh, now they're high. There you go. There's several of them. So thank you.
Anyone else on any of the bullets on this slide, the draft Arizona legislative package? And like I said, we'll have a discussion about how to move that forward, including with Speaker Bowers and the other legislative reps on this committee in terms of the next steps that we're going to talk about next. So we'll move on, and Ted will do that.
Yes.
Discussion.
So we have two more slides before delegate comments and call the public. One is on timeline, to just remind everybody. The first bullet there, that's today. The legislative session commences on Monday. Governor Ducey we have been told, will explore options with legislative leaders for there's a word missing there, action, including a potential concurrent special session on this topic. January 14th is, as Tom mentioned earlier, the deadline for written comments to ADWR on the Arizona ICS exhibits that are posted on the ADWR website. It was an open house yesterday on those exhibits. There's, I don't know, what, a half a dozen of them or so to look at. There also is a draft of the Arizona ICS framework agreement that's posted on the ADWR website. It's not completely done yet, but it gives you a good idea of what it looks like. We've talked about it in these meetings before. January 17th, there is a tentative special Arizona Water Banking Authority meeting. It's scheduled from 10 to noon, and it will be to discuss these topics.
And it's not tentative. I think it's set, right?
Okay, so it's set. There are also two CWCD special board meetings, tentatively. They're scheduled on January 17th and January 24th. We will use at least one of those and probably both of those to consider various, as these agreements are drawn up and brought forward, that CWCD is a party to, are going to have to bring those to our board, just like other parties are going to have to do. And then also any legislative action, our bylaws require us to bring those items to our board to get a staff position that we're authorized to engage in. You can see there's 17th, both the Water Bank and the CAP board may be meeting at the same day and actually at the same time. We're going to have to figure out how to do that, but we will. We've got enough people, I think, to make that happen. Any questions on the timeline? Brian?
Will this group be meeting again before January 31st?
I don't know. I do not know yet. I think well, we may be able to answer. I'll give you. I will speculate based on my own knowledge that maybe Tom and I will have a better idea as of the end of next week about whether or not that will happen and when. And so let's move, and it's because of the next step. So allow me to move to that. And if there are any other questions on the timeline, okay. Yes, Senator Otondo.
Thank you. I have another quick question, and it has to do with working groups. Are there any other working groups that are forming to move pieces of this potential legislation forward? And if so?
That's on the next page, too.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Senator. So any other questions, or let's move to next steps where the answers to these very important questions will be waiting for us. Okay. All right. So next steps. One, obviously, is to continue to draft and complete necessary agreements. Basically, there's a set of agreements that CAWCD is responsible for drafting. There's a set of agreements that ADWR is responsible for drafting, and then there's a set of agreements that the cities are responsible for drafting. Our proposal, Tom's and my proposal, is that we target next week as sometime during that week to begin to share those agreements first among the parties, and then to the steering committee to take a look at that. That's, Brian, why once this process begins to happen and the type of feedback that we're getting back, I think, in addition to the existing issues that need to be worked out, will give us a better idea about, do we need to get this group back together again or not. The second item that needs to happen is continue to work specifically with legislative members on this steering committee, and also the alternates, I think, that are in the room too. We'd like to hear any ideas that you might have, at least at a high level today, to prepare proposed legislation and then do the same thing, circulate it to members of the steering committee for input.
And so we have Speaker Bowers here. We have Senator Kerr, the chair of the Senate Water Committee. We're missing Senator Griffin, who will be Representative Griffin, chair of the Water Committee in the House. But we really set up this discussion item to get your feedback on how you think we should move forward to draft the legislative package, who we should share it with, and kind of what the process would be. And we're kind of really looking to you, because this is your bailiwick, not Ted and I's bailiwick.
Thank you. A, to bring the draft. Then we decide structure, omnibus, as Senator Atondo mentioned. We are planning to have 3 meetings for information for the new members of the legislature. Representative Gabaldon, that wasn't just about got her in another chamber there, and her members and colleagues combined with ours. Any outstanding information, staff will be ready to inform them, teach them Water 101 in some cases for the newest members. At the end of that, report back to the governor. The governor will issue a call, I would presume, which could be rather quick, for a concurrent session. Gavel it in, start working through it. We will do everything we can to be there by the 31st. I would hope that we would recognize that these are elected officials too. And at the time when they get done, nobody's holding up, nobody's putting on any brakes. We're working in good faith, and we will get there. So that's the 30,000-foot level, and then we go in the back room and get the 5-foot level.
Specifically, Speaker Bowers, what guidance would you provide to me and Tom as far as, and this gets back to Senator Otando's question, a legislative drafting work group approach, and who ought to be involved and who ought to lead that in your mind?
Well, I'm very hesitant to take any drafting capability away from Ledge Council. So there are some excellent people, and gratefully so, that are there to work with us. So they would be happy to work with your staff, absolutely.
So we will start with the drafts that we've prepared to date and reach out to Ledge Council, and that will be the start of the process.
You bet.
Sounds good? Thank you.
Yeah, and may I just also add that I would like to see staff present as well, just because they have input from the legislators, perhaps potential concerns that could offer them guidance as well. So just involving our water policy wonks would be great.
So if it's okay, I would suggest that Ledge Council decide who those staffers should be, rather than me saying who they should be.
Our staffs work with Ledge Council all the time. I mean, that shouldn't be interrupted.
Time. Okay, that actually is the last slide. If there are any other questions on next steps, and hopefully, Brian, that it didn't give you a definitive answer, but I think by the end of next week, Tom and I will have a better idea about whether or not we need to get this whole group back together again or not. We may want to, on February 2nd or 3rd, maybe have a party. So that'd be kind of a change of pace for this group. Well, we'll see.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, sure.
So before we go to the call to the public, any other delegate comments, questions before we move on? Laura.
Thanks, Tom. I wanted to take the time to thank Governor Lewis again for stepping up and mentioning that we could have a meeting to talk about clarification of the resolution of the council. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to come up with a solution to the uncertainty I know that the home builders voiced concerning the GRD Rick Rose issue, but I think we can work through that. And just while I was looking, as Ted and Tom were going over the additional or the agreements that are necessary for DCP, it struck me that even though the GRD Rick Rose deal is attached to DCP or has become attached to its approval, there is nothing in DCP, and if DCP is just a set of agreements, if there is some way to memorialize the Rick Rose deal in the DCP process, that might be a way to alleviate some of the concerns that we have. So just an idea.
So the first item Ted talked about in the list of agreements was kind of how everything fits together and how that might work, and maybe that's a place for that to be added in to make it clear what that connection is and how that works kind of as a package.
And with that,
Senator Tondo?
may I just add that every time you add a little something, it becomes a Christmas tree, and it makes our work harder. So I would like to go back to Governor Lewis's very kind offer and see how that plays out before we continue to attach anything on to the legislation.
So I don't think that would be part of the legislation. It would be in this agreement that we talked about earlier that shows how everything fits together in the implementation plan. And I don't see that agreement being something approved in legislation.
Okay, I misunderstood then. Thank you for the clarity.
Here's the slide, Senator Tunner, that Tom's referring to, that we're still looking at a way of how do we glue all the pieces together in some kind of overall descriptive, comprehensive statement of how all the pieces fit together. Tom's suggestion was maybe it's not a thing yet, but once we have one, maybe this is a place to explore Laura's suggestion.
Other delegates? Stephanie, then Brian.
Just had a couple of quick comments. First, I'd like to thank the City of Tucson for going above and beyond and looking for more solutions to what could be more of a problem, and so we have definitely something to work towards. I don't know if there's more certainty in that, but at least it's a solution that's offered, and we'll see what happens as we move forward. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I also want to thank both Chairman Bushatsky and Chairman Cook for shepherding through this process and making sure that agricultural mitigation stays at the forefront. I know everybody here has been working, but I think I'll save my accolades and my criticisms for when we get done with this deal. wait to see what we get out of it. But I did want to also call attention real quickly to a study, if none of you, or if some of you have not been made aware, that was just released by the University of Arizona, titled, it was released last week, titled Contribution of On-Farm Agriculture and Agribusiness to the Pinell County Economy, an Economic Contribution Analysis for 2016. It'll be something that we are carrying with us throughout this process in the legislature and referencing quite a bit. I feel like it basically shows that the argument that we've been making all this time on the importance of this process is justified. And I will just list real quickly in the first statement there from the study. Pinell County ranks in the top 2% of all U.S. counties in the total value of agriculture sales, and in the top 1% in cotton and cottonseed sales, milk sales, and inventories of cattle and calves. Supporting large dairy and beef industries, Pinell County ranks in the top 4% of all counties in barley, corn, and forage crop acreage. That's over 3,000 counties in the United States. Agriculture's contribution to Pinell County's economy goes beyond on-farm production and jobs. A ripple of economic activity is stimulated in other industries to meet the demands of agricultural producers for inputs. So in total, it's a $2.3 billion impact each year. So I just wanted to reiterate that because that's something that we have been talking about. And I know that that facts and statistics are appreciated, and as we move through this process, we'll be carrying that information with us. So thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Brian?
Yeah, I'd like to voice my support as well for Tucson Water offering to backstop Pinell's water needs. Personally, we've been working with Tucson Water since the mid-90s as our GSF partner, and they've been tremendous help and very good to work with. Also, the Southern Arizona Water Users Association, also known as SAWA, another hat that I wear, supports the effluent rule changes that Tucson Water proposed, as it does offer good water policy and more tools to use in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Any other delegates before we move on? Okay, members of the public that would like to address us on the discussion and issues that we went through today. Mark.
I hate to put the appropriator's hat on, but I've mentioned this in my comments to the committee before. CAP is a small organization in the overall scheme of things. We have a $370 million operating budget, but we have $1.5 billion worth of debt that we owe to the United States and others. And so as we move forward with this DCP plan, I'm asking especially the legislators to be conscious of a very small Section 5 contractor with a very large pile of debt. And I'm hearing a lot of water moving back and forth, and you'll do this and you'll do that, but what I don't see is how much that's going to cost. What I do know is the CAP rates that have been published last year includes a 20% rate increase to cover the cost of this and other things. That may not be enough. And your plan is wrapped up in this, and we are all going to own that. And what I want you to be conscious of is the debt repayment plan that we're obligated to fulfill to the United States. We had income coming in from the Navajo generating station. That is no longer there. We had income coming from the full CAP allocation before the DCP plan that is going to be reduced by 30%. We collect property taxes of $70 million per year to subsidize the water operations and to pay the debt to the United States. None of that is going to go away with this plan. What it is going to do is add additional crunches on our ability to recover our cost and deliver water for the remaining stakeholders. And I'm confident we can work together, but I want to be conscious of one other thing, is that the way I look at it as a senior board member, we're putting in $312 million into this deal. If you add up all the Christmas tree items that we've reviewed in the last few board meetings, the state is putting in $35 million. I want to remind the state that you took $25 million out of the water bank to balance the budget a number of years ago. And so I kind of look, I do the math, and your portion of this is near in the $10 million range because you owe us. And so I want to be conscious for everyone as they develop the appropriations for the director and Ted and these other parties to sign, that somebody's got to pay for this. And that somebody is the 5 million people that I represent, that we are all going to have to implement a rate increase to pay for, and we're going to have to commit to these long-term drought reduction plans for the next 7 to 10 years. We're all going to pay for this, and I think we have a plan together, a wink and a nod. We might get there, but it's not free, and everybody's put a little bit in, and we appreciate that very much, but some of us are putting in a lot in. And so to the extent that you can highlight the appropriations that each party's put in as you move forward, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. Thank everyone. Happy New Year, everyone. And we are adjourned.